Mr. Chairman, we're live on YouTube.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Select Federal Natural Resource Management Committee here in Casper. This is our second and final meeting, I would imagine, for the interim. So thanks everybody for being here, both in person and online. We'll go ahead and start with a roll call.
Senator Anderson. Here. Senator Beitman.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Here.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Co-Chairman Boner.
Here.
Co-Chairman Burkhart.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Our first topic of the day is something that's certainly been on our minds over the past year or so. Certainly, I also had a lot of new developments since we last met last spring, and even within the past week or two, we've seen some movement on this very important issue. Talk about the leasing moratorium, or soon to be former moratorium after some legal action on the part of the states, and just the overall status of the mineral leasing on federal lands and federal mineral estate here in the state of Wyoming. So that being said, we do have the governor's office on Zoom to provide us with an update, as well as some follow-up with other individuals who are affected by federal action or inaction, as the case may be. So I believe we have Mr. Luthi online. If we could admit him, and he'll go and provide an update from the governor's office.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning. Good to see you.
Well, pleasure to see you all as well. Thank you for this opportunity. And as I mentioned to you already, good morning and hopefully a happy Friday to everyone. I also note that some of you have had a pretty heavy committee week. So thank you for sticking through with your dedication and following up with this meeting today. Governor Gordon sends his very best to this committee. He always and continues to appreciate greatly your support and the interest and your interest in that always present, yet not always helpful, federal land and mineral policies that affect Wyoming residents every day. Wyoming and her citizens may not have a lot of sway on federal policies, but these policies certainly come home to roost in our state. With approximately 48% of the surface and about 67% of mineral estate under federal control, the federal government is an ever-present neighbor. And like all neighbors, that relationship can be very good or very challenging. Unfortunately, at this point, when it comes to developing our fossil fuel resources, it is a challenging time. I was very pleased to see the rest of your witnesses that you have on this panel, and partly because I really know that they are best set to be able to share some of their challenges and successes they've had since the last time they met with you at this committee. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned it briefly, but the status of the current leasing moratorium is that technically it does not exist because of the earlier court decision ruling out of Louisiana. Now, you might also recall that Wyoming, we filed our own challenge to the moratorium in the Wyoming District Court. Now, that case was fully briefed, probably has been for about 6 weeks, I believe, and we're waiting action from the judge on whatever the next steps might be. However, under the Louisiana ruling, the BLM has moved forward, and the Wyoming BLM has indicated that they're going to proceed with the quarters 1 and 2 lease sales. But the reality of that is that lease sale is going to be about half, probably less than half, of the original number of tracts that was scoped. For example, BLM pulled out all the priority habitat management areas for sage grouse, as they say, to meet other court challenges for further review. BLM is currently seeking comment on the environmental assessment on the remaining proposed tracts, and in particular, They're looking for comments on their analysis of determining the effect of the release of greenhouse gases in connection with oil and gas leasing. I just point out that those comments are due on December 11th. And certainly we, the state of Wyoming, probably under the governor's signature, will provide comments as well on that analysis. BLM does plan to conduct that sale early next year. We don't have any information on the status of quarters 3 and 4. But basically, in summary, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Wyoming has not had a federal oil and gas lease sale in 2021, nor will we have one in 2021. Mr. Chairman, you also mentioned recent developments, and I think this partly of what you may have been referring to is the federal government, the Biden administration, also released their federal review of the oil and gas leasing program. This review was said to be ready for review or would have been released early or about midsummer, but instead it came out the day after Thanksgiving. I would say that I didn't see anything in the review of which I would be thankful for. The report recommends fewer leases for sale and higher costs for our Wyoming oil and gas producers in order to develop those leases. I point out that the current reconciliation bill that is currently in front of the Senate also adds more costs and more restrictions to federal oil, gas, and coal leasing. And again, I point out that the witnesses following me, I think, can give more concrete examples than I am at this point. I also point out to you Governor Gordon's letters on the leasing review and the reconciliation bill. I do apologize. I just did not get them sent to you until this morning, but hopefully you all received them or you have them now within your electronic mail, and they're available for your review. And please do not hesitate to call me or get a hold of me or the governor should you have any questions. In closing, I point out the governor has reached out to many federal officials and attempt to persuade them about the importance of the ability to develop our natural resources. We do share concern over the proper management of greenhouse gases, but we do not share the philosophical belief that climate concerns outweigh everything else. The governor backs up his arguments with litigation. The state of Wyoming is currently involved in over 30 cases dealing with leasing, ferrets, sage grouse, and other resources that are important to Wyoming and have in a way of affecting oil, gas, coal, and other leasing policies. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I realize this is a very brief overview, but I am happy to join the rest of your witnesses and hopefully be able to answer any questions.
Okay, committee, any questions for the governor's office? Senator Biden.
Good morning. Thank you, Randall, for being here. Thank you for all you guys are doing. Tell the governor we appreciate his efforts as well. My question, obviously, we just got this, I don't even know what you call this thing, environmental justice left-wing propaganda sheet that's called this need for reform on oil and gas leasing and the oil and gas program. That's just, like you mentioned, just going to raise costs for our oil and gas companies. It's going to basically keep all these resources in the ground when we need them right now. My question is regarding the banking side of this. We've seen this full-on assault on our fossil fuel industry here with this leasing moratorium, but also with the banks and this ESG these standards that the big banks are imposing on and basically debanking fossil fuel companies. Is there anything the governor's office is doing on that front regarding ESG and what we can do here in Wyoming to make sure that our producers have access to capital, because it's a capital intensive business. They need that working capital on a daily basis. But if these big banks are choking off that capital supply, that's really going to be a painful blow to these guys. Is there anything you guys are doing on that front at the governor's office? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, excellent question. And you're absolutely right. That's another part of again, the difficulties that all all fossil fuel producers are facing. The governor has joined with other Republican governors as part of the Republican Governors Association, and I can send that. I just need to make a note. I'm pretty sure there was a letter on that that went to President Biden probably about 3 months ago regarding their concern, our concern, that exactly that. You're attempting to choke off financing, and worse than that, you're attempting to tell the banks what they can and cannot finance. And that we find most disturbing and really an overreach of what federal policy should do. Banks should be able to look at the assets, look at the what is going to be profitable, what looks like in the long term is going to make sense. And Senator Biden, you know this far better than I do. All this effort from the Biden administration to restrict our natural resources, particularly oil, gas, and coal, will do nothing, absolutely nothing, to help the climate. These other nations, other companies, other areas are going to just pick up the slack. You know, U.S. producers have just done yeoman work in the last less than 10 years to become the #1 producer of oil and gas. And then we now are attempting to choke that off. And then what do? We ask OPEC for help. We also decide, let's drain our what I call the bank account of oil, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We believe those are wrong-headed policies. But I've been a long way of getting back to your question, Senator. Let me double check on that RGA letter, and I will send it to you and members of the committee.
Yeah, follow up on that, maybe just a little bit more information either from Mr. Luthi or Senator Beitman. What's the genesis of that restriction in capital? Is it a function of the federal government restrictions on the banks? The banks on their own initiative without official federal input doing this on their own. I've heard anecdotal stories about banks before any federal rules came out putting kind of these superficial restrictions on how oil and gas companies can use their use their financing. So just a little bit more background for the committee as to what exactly is driving these changes. Is it federal policy? Is it a unilateral decision by the banks, or a combination thereof? Mr. Luthi, you want to take that?
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't sure if that was a question directed at me. Here's would be my views of it. It's a combination. You have the federal government, the U.S. government, certainly considered probably the most influential and strongest government in the world, making very pronounced statements about the need to go away from fossil fuels. Banks are going to hear that. Boards are going to hear that. You see that in their ESG policies. But the reality is that isn't a sound policy. I have yet to see a study that that fossil fuels will not be still a part of the energy mix, an important part of the energy mix for the next 20 or 30 years. Other things to look at and to at least consider. I know Governor Gordon had some discussions a few months ago with Governor Dunleavy of Alaska and talked about this issue. Both Wyoming and Alaska also have pretty substantial permanent mineral trust funds. And we rely on banks to invest those funds. And we want to look at if these are the same banks that are now complaining about, backing fossil fuels, should we be doing some decision making about whether or not they should be managing our permanent mineral trust funds?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, just real quick follow up based off that comment, then we'll get to you, Senator. Is there a place for, I hate to even go here, for Wyoming to use those permanent funds to finance oil and gas directly?
Mr. Chairman, if that's directed to me, I think that's well worth looking at. I'm just not sure of what particulars we can do on that. I think the options are many and varied. So I would be happy and to follow up with you and other members of the committee and discuss this further.
On
And
your
Mr. Chairman,
question
I
about-
might add, of course, the treasurer is also the key player here and should also be involved in these discussions.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
on your question about Wyoming participating with the oil and gas business, we kind of are with the coal bed methane. We're picking up a lot right there. So we're participating already, but I agree with you. We could use some of our permanent mineral trust fund to loan to credible companies that are exploring in our territory. Another item that is affecting these banks is the investors are demanding that they don't loan to any carbon businesses anymore. And those investors aren't Randall Luthi and Representative McGuire. They're Microsoft and all these tech companies that have huge positions on these banks. And so when they come in and say don't loan anymore, that's what happens. We saw that with Bank of the West 2 years ago in Wyoming. So I don't think we can influence the banks much, but maybe we could do something on our own. One note, Norway decided they weren't going to finance any oil anymore. Really, really incredible. And just yesterday, they came out and said, well, we made a little mistake. We're going to invest in new exploration, but we won't loan to you if you're old exploration. So they're slowly making a little bit of change. And I think we'll see that with investment opportunities. You know, the other side of that is there are people who will loan to oil and gas. So those guys are going to do well in this environment. Thank you.
Any questions or comments so far, committee? Okay, I have a few. Kind of switching gears here, talking about the direct federal action or inaction, I guess you could say, when it comes to oil and gas leasing. You talked about it finally got around to offering the first and second quarter oil and gas lease sales. Just, that'll be next year, early next year. 50% of those leases went away. Do you have an overall assessment as to what the year-over-year reduction is? Can we expect similar reductions moving forward? Is that 50% number a solid number that we can expect moving forward? What's your diagnosis there, Mr. Luthi?
Mr. Chairman, that is a difficult crystal ball to peer into. And I would probably just beg ignorance on that. But as you point out, the first two were reduced by about 50%. Is there any indication that quarters 3 and 4 will be any different? I haven't seen that it will.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Luthi, just a question back to something you had said with the leases that they had pulled out anything that was in the sage grouse core areas. Do you think that's a move then to reject Wyoming sage grouse mitigation plans?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, I don't see that as a direct effort to do that. Frankly, there are some other court cases, I think 2 of them out of the Montana court, dealing with these priority habitat management areas. And the court said, you've just got to better address them of what kind of how you're going to set your priorities in sage grouse core areas. Now, coupled with this at the same time, you also notice the Department of the Interior says, oh yeah, we're going to go look at sage grouse focal areas as well. It's our belief, Wyoming, again, has the largest stable population of sage grouse in the world. we seem to do a pretty good job of managing that. I'm not sure that the feds can really help us with that as much as they think they would like. So our efforts right now, as we move through some of these sage grouse reviews, is exactly that. Look and see how we've done it. It's working. Sage grouse populations, do vary from year to year. And as long as they're in the expected variation should be, let Wyoming manage the sage grouse the way we have been. That is how we plan to address these.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Luthi, I'm looking through this report here, and one of the more troubling things I'm seeing, besides the raising of the royalty rates and the, bringing environmental justice organizations to the table, and is this part there's kind of an obscure part of this report where it's titled low potential lands, where they're talking about cracking down on nominating non-competitive lands for bid. And I've had personal experience with this. In the early 2000s, I was working for a client on a project. It was a wildcat prospect in northern Colorado. And I nominated almost 100,000, possibly more acres of federal lands for a gas project. And they basically laughed me out of the room, saying that this is such low potential. This is not going to go anywhere. Well, the geologist begged to differ, and there's still gas production on these lands now. If this were to be in place now, that would have never been developed. So I have concerns that this is really going to hinder future development of our oil and gas resources on federal lands. Is this part of your, you mentioned a lawsuit here at the district court level in Wyoming. Is this part of it, where we're fighting back against cutting back on these non-competitive lease nominations?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, I would have to go back and read the pleadings, but as I recall, the original pleadings dealt with the moratorium specifically, about the ability of just not offering any leases for sale. But I can tell you, I couldn't agree with you more on the so-called low-value, non-competitive leases. That's what's made the oil and gas industry so successful in many efforts. These are the small Wyoming independent producers, the mom and pop operations that are willing to try and see what we can do on some of these leases that have been ruled out by the larger companies. One of the things that has been somewhat confusing to us of why you just want to eliminate those is why. Because, if you don't have development, that land just pretty much stays in that same condition, which is what most people seem to think they want. So that is part of our overall strategy. We are going to comment back on, and have done so, that we don't believe that's a wise policy to follow.
And just a quick follow-up on the lawsuit that we filed in district court here in the state. Just if you could give us a brief overview, what exactly we expect to be different than the outcome that we've seen in Louisiana. What are the differences between the two lawsuits, if any, and or expecting different outcomes from this one as opposed to the one that successfully produced the stay in Louisiana?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wyoming filed their own lawsuit because Wyoming is just somewhat different than many of the other states. Some of it is because of the amount of federal acreage we have, certainly the amount of federal mineral estate as well, but also the land use pattern, the checkerboard pattern. But really the relief, as I recall, was basically the same. We asked for an injunction against the moratorium. And then in order to tell Interior to move forward with these lease sales. The Louisiana court did rule before the Wyoming court. I suspect, and this is just pure speculation on my part, that might be why the Wyoming court hasn't yet ruled, is because they basically see the Louisiana court appears to be getting pretty much what Wyoming would have asked for as well. I don't know that. Again, that is just probably going to get me in trouble for speculating in areas that I probably shouldn't.
Any further questions for the governor's office committee? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Luthi. Appreciate your time and your effort and all the things the governor is doing to protect a vital part of our economy. So I'm sure this is just the beginning. We'll continue to see what we can do. Obviously, we got a bill draft here later this morning, but if there's anything else the legislature can do, let us know. I'm particularly interested in exploring the idea of, along with the treasurer, of what we can do if there is a significant restriction on capital for this sort of development, what role the state can play, if any.
Will do, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, thank you again for your efforts and your time. If you would like, I will stay available through this next panel. If not, I can win my way off to other projects, whichever you prefer.
Well, feel free to stick around. We'd love to have you, but just I'm sure we're good either way, Mr. Luthi. But yeah, thanks for your participation. Obviously, we'd love to have you stick around if that's possible. So.
Will do. As long as I can, I will, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, we have the Petroleum Association. I believe Mr. Obermiller is also on Zoom.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. Welcome back to the select committee here. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks also just for making this remote testimony available. I really do appreciate that. And good to see you all. Mr. Luthi did a great job outlining most of the issues. I don't want to be respectful of your time. I don't want to repeat, or at least I don't want to repeat too often things that Mr. Luthi talked about. A few highlights I want to mention that you have already covered. Number one, just while it's fresh in my mind with respect to the lawsuits that were asked about there in the last question, I will note that what happened with Louisiana court when they put forth the preliminary injunction on the nationwide injunction on the leasing moratorium, what Wyoming did and what we did along with our partners in the Western Energy Alliance is we dropped our motion for preliminary injunction because Louisiana court did that for us. So what that meant is that we proceeded immediately to that case on the merits, and that has been fully briefed in front of Judge Skavdal here in Wyoming, and we are awaiting a decision at this point. So in terms of deciding on the merits of the case on whether or not the Department of Interior has what they call discretionary what they call the discretion to hold lease sales, which we believe is extra legal. That we're actually way ahead of Louisiana on that, and hope to have a ruling on that relatively soon. Theoretically, could happen this calendar year still, but we'll see what happens there. And as soon as I hear anything, I'll be sure to let you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee know what comes down on that court case. So, Mr. Chairman, a couple of things I wanted to mention. You've already touched on a couple of them, so I won't belabor the point, particularly on the sage grouse. The Biden administration, as Mr. Luthi said, did in fact say they were going to, hold the lease sale. They pushed it to 2022, so that's right. There is not going to be a lease sale in 2021 in Wyoming. That, of course, has budgetary impacts on the state of Wyoming immediately because of the bonus bids for leases. It did not happen at all this year, and that is not a small amount of money that was lost to Wyoming and Wyoming's general fund and education and first responders and all of that. So that is unfortunate. In the environmental assessment that they put out that Mr. Luthi mentioned, comment period is middle of this month. We are in the middle of drafting comments, as well as the state of Wyoming and many others about it. Does have those two items. You all covered the sage grouse one in particular. It is troubling because Part of it is, of course, forced by other litigation, but it's troubling in the sense that we have just made such great strides in terms of sage grouse conservation in Wyoming. Remember, sage grouse are not an endangered species. They're not federally managed. It's a state managed animal, and we have done an extraordinary job of doing that. And the efforts of the BLM to defer as a result of that would need to show why, give some sort of justification as to why these leases need to be deferred, or why development could not take place there in contravention of what their previous policy, that these areas can, and in fact, should and can be leased and still have the protections under the executive order. Remember that when a lease happens, nothing changes on the ground. Every bit of conservation that happens in the sage grouse core areas or in these priority habitat management areas still takes place under a lease. And that takes place at the project level. When a company seeks a permit to drill, all of the timing stipulations, the radius buffers, the percentage impact on a particular area, all of that comes into play after the lease, not before the lease, not right when the lease happens. So in fact, it's sort of cut off their nose to spite their face. They're cutting off revenue both to the federal government and to the state at a point where the conservation question doesn't actually happen. That happens later. So it makes little sense to us. We'll be talking a lot about that, but I want to spend one more moment, Mr. Chairman, talking about the other part of the environmental assessment on these leases, which is brand new and is troubling to us, and I think should be really troubling to this committee and to the state of Wyoming. And that's on evaluating the so-called social cost of carbon. So the social cost of carbon, as you'll remember, is it's not new. It's been around for quite a while, but essentially it's an effort to try to monetize the impacts of carbon emissions in the life cycle of fossil fuels. So not just the development, but of course the downstream use of oil, gas, coal, or whatnot, and to apply some sort of rate to that, essentially to estimate how much impact there will be over the life of a particular well, throughout its whole life cycle. So I can bore you to tears going into the exact details of how that's come up with, but suffice it to say that it is a model, a really long-term model that does a lot of assumptions and estimates, and then in terms of how a product will be used, but then also how it diminishes over time and all of that. And so what the EA is basically saying right now is that if, just to put some numbers on it for you, if the leases at issue coming up here in first quarter of 2022, if all of the leases were granted and all of the assumptions were right, that would average they would average of 0.028% of total US CO2 emissions, 0.028% under the proposed actions. That's all the leases. Now remember, they deferred, they changed their proposal to defer half of them. So it actually drops to 0.012% of US total CO2 emissions, 0.012%. Either way, this is an unbelievably small portion of overall US CO2 emissions. And to assert that somehow these leases, cutting them in half, or somehow helps to move the needle on not only forget global carbon emissions, but even US carbon emissions, is absurd on its face. And it simply is, in my belief, a punitive punishment on public land states like Wyoming and New Mexico. The other part of that, though, Mr. Chairman, on the social cost of carbon is this attempt to, like I said, put an actual monetary value on that. Remember, these environmental assessments are trying to evaluate, and this is fair, they're trying to evaluate both the impacts, but they also need to evaluate the benefits of projects. That's where our Wyoming counties have come in and been really helpful, is they are pretty good at helping to evaluate, at least on the local level, the positive impacts. When you start looking at social cost of carbon on a global scale, and you only attach values on what that supposed cost is. On the EA, on the low side, they estimate 360 million of costs, and on the high side, 4.1 billion of costs. But mum's the word on the social benefit of the human flourishing that comes from the availability of affordable and reliable energy. Then what you have is a weighted document that seems to suggest that it's all cost and extraordinary cost and no benefit to developing Wyoming's resources. So it's troubling. I think when we talk about the lease moratorium, we've talked a lot about that on a upper level, but it's really excuse me one second. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I had to close my door. Someone was coming in the office there. We were sort of a little bit distracted by their initial comments about a full moratorium, but it's really these sorts of things hidden in these documents, the social cost of carbon at an enormous rate, where they're going to actually start to make the case that these projects are more expensive than they are valuable, and that is what really troubles me. So I'm going to stop there. I want to go back to Senator Beitman's points a little bit about the report. There's some things in there I want to point out, but I want to stop there on the EA on the upcoming lease and make sure I can answer any questions there before I get distracted by something else.
Okay, thank you. Any questions so far, committee? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, Pete, it kind of sounds like maybe the lease moratorium is more of a political thing than it is saving the environment. Kind of sounds like somewhere somebody thought that was a good idea politically. Is any other countries being affected like that? Or are they stopping any development in China or Russia? A couple of our competitors.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Anderson, appreciate that. I can't tell you that I'm an expert on every energy policy in all these other countries, but you all know just from news sources that a lot of these places are in a legitimate energy crisis right now. More so, I mean, you know, we have high energy prices here for lots of different reasons, but part of it is just, you know, getting supply back up to meet the demand. So you talk about, you know, this effort being sort of political in nature. That's perhaps true. I certainly think it's performative in nature because you can shut down this, as Mr. Luthi said, you can shut down public lands development. You can account for carbon in the emissions from public lands development. But if there's if demand is what it is, and I think, you know, Mr. Detag will probably talk about coal's increased demand now. Demand is what it is, and every projection says that demand is going to continue to rise for at least a decade, if not longer, and then just flatten out. Then just shutting off a public lands development is performative. Is not a policy that meets any objective from a climate perspective.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, please proceed.
So a couple of things, Mr. Chairman, about the report, and I'll try not to be too sarcastic about this, Mr. Chairman, but it was frustrating at the very it's frustrating at the very least to have the rhetoric be that we need to shut down all leasing so that we can spend all our time doing a very careful assessment of the oil and gas leasing program, and then all of that focus and shutdown resulted in just an 18-page paper that repeats arguments that have been made for decades. There's nothing really new in here, and it's just I find it very frustrating. I want to just cover a couple of things in here, Mr. Chairman, that I think require a little bit. I know most of you know this, and so perhaps maybe this is just cathartic for me. I don't know. So shut me down if you would like to. But a couple of things I wanted to mention. First, I want to talk about, I want to highlight what Senator Biteman mentioned about the non-competitive leases. I won't repeat the argument. I think Mr. Luthi and you, Senator Biteman, covered that very well. This is a very important part. It seems like a small part, but it's a very important part to Wyoming. There's a section in the report. It sounds like you might have it in front of you, Senator Biteman. I'll point it out. It's on the bottom of page 8 of that report under bonus bids. I just found this particularly eye-opening that it says that the GAO, Government Accountability Office, which they base a lot of this on, found that leases purchased with a higher bonus bid of more than $100 per acre are over 20 times more likely to be developed in their first lease term than leases purchased with a minimum bid of $2 per acre. The BLM should initiate rulemaking to increase the minimum bid to provide a better return to taxpayer. What a backwards assessment of how the market works or how commodities work. What they seem to be saying there is that oil appears if the government makes the bid price more than $100, then there's oil there and will be developed fast, as opposed to the other way around. Of course, it's developed faster and there's more oil in a place with a bonus bid more than $100. That's what gives the area value. That's where why the bid is higher, is because the resources are there and it's accessible. But where we seem to have the disconnect is apparently DOI seems to believe that that's just all there and all easy to find, and we can just flip the switch. When it takes, like was said previously, somebody like Senator Biteman with some cockamamie scheme that nobody else believes in, and then it turns out to be right. But they take all that risk at the beginning. And so this is really a beginning effort to choke off exploration. And we sort of combine, we often talk about upstream production as exploration and production. We lump those two together, but exploration and production are two different things and require different mindsets and skills. And if we shut off the exploration part, eventually production declines. And that's when Wyoming would really pay the price. Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it at that with one last thing regarding, I think you all know this. There's lots of talk about how many leases are already out in Wyoming and talk that there's 67 years worth of drilling and unproducing leases and all that, and that we have to return to balance and those sorts of things. Keep in mind, Mr. Chairman, that west-wide areas leased for oil and gas account for about 10% of all BLM surface acres. They account for about 4% of all federally owned land. So we are not out of balance. And in the case of unproducing leases in Wyoming, it's less than 8% of Wyoming's land area is in leases that are currently not producing. And as I said before, when they are leased in that way and there is no production, the report says right out of the gate, one of the first things it says is that when it's under contract for potential oil and gas activity, the shared public lands cannot be managed for other purposes. Simply isn't true. And we know in Wyoming, when an area is leased and there's not production on the area, it is open and available for recreation, for hunting purposes, for other conservation purposes, and all of that. So it's I bristle at that kind of I can only call it fear mongering because I don't know what else it is. I know that they know that that's not true. So it makes me very frustrated to read it in a report like this. Rant over, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for that, and I'm happy to take questions.
Well, I think just follow up off that last comment. Even when an area is produced, what's the percent roughly of the actual surface disturbance? It seems to me that even when there is production going on, it is my experience just as a private landowner with oil and gas production on our place. I mean, you're talking about a path that may be 10, 15 acres in an area that produces up to 1,200 acres, in a drilling spacing unit, worth of oil and gas. So can you spend a little bit of time of talk about the relative amount of actual disturbance on the land when an area is leased?
Yeah, appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. And I think, you said it perfectly, and that it's kind of project specific, but as technology increases, as our industry gets better and better at reducing impacts on the land, it gets smaller and smaller. And you recall that in the in sage grouse core area, there is a land disturbance thresholds and all of that. So you can basically you can basically say that the industry can get at about a 3% to, depending on the area or what's going on there, 3% to 10%. And take all of that leased area, even if you go high and say it's 10%. It's just a tiny fraction of the land area that produces an enormous amount of energy for the land area for the rest of the country that the country is demanding. All of that combined, again, just highlights for me how performative this is. It's not serious policy suggestions. Reasonable people can disagree on the various fees and costs and all those sorts of things. That's fine. There's obviously reasons why the royalty rate at the federal level is lower than state and private lands, because state and private lands don't take 7 years to develop a project, that kind of thing. But those are prudential arguments that can be had. So much of this, I'm afraid, is performative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great job, Pete. Thank you so much for all you guys are doing. Just like I thank the governor's office. Not everybody's crazy. My constituents really support the fossil fuels industry in Wyoming, and we appreciate your efforts. Before we let you go, I had a question for you regarding pipelines. Has your members noticed the basically flat out unwillingness of the feds to approve any kind of a pipeline cutting across federal lands? And then how is that affecting or exacerbating our energy problem here in Wyoming?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, Senator Biteman. With respect to pipeline corridors or any sort of transition corridor related to, again, to fossil fuels, the same sorts of challenges are there as are in the upstream production side. So the hoops to jump through are intended to be a fair analysis, but in terms of the it is a bit tilted in terms of how midstream companies or transmission companies, transmission projects are treated on federal lands as opposed to some other projects on federal lands. So there definitely is that. Wyoming at least has a pretty significant network of pipelines and midstream partners that are able to get our resources to markets, and that's good. So we don't have the type of challenges that our friends in North Dakota have in terms of being able to export out of the state, even domestically. So thank goodness for that. I think our challenge, just to you triggered another thought in my head, Senator Biteman, regarding your comments on ESG as well earlier. To be fair, a lot of companies in my membership are working pretty hard on ESG, but a lot of what we found is that it's especially in terms of investors and banking and financing, it is really just doing a better job of talking about what we already do and what we've already invested and what we plan to invest in those areas. And if the market is demanding those things, we can do that for the most part, as long as we're allowed to continue to play in the space. You just look at what the companies in Sublette County are doing to meet the demand of places like Los Angeles and Las Vegas and those sorts of places. Totally fine. In terms of providing energy to Americans, we can meet that demand even under under ESG questions, as long as we're given a fair shake on that and given a realistic shake as compared to what else is out there and what the demand is and all of that. So and the what the pipelines bring to that in terms of safety and accessibility and speed of delivery and all of that is an important component.
Follow up then. Thank you for that. Going back to the ESG topic, looking down the road, I see that as a very real, credible, existential threat to our industries here in Wyoming. If it's not a problem now, do you see it becoming a problem? And do your members have access to capital currently? Are there banks in Wyoming, say Wyoming local banks, that do not follow the woke capital agenda and are able to access capital currently?
Oh, sure, Mr. Chairman, Senator Byland. Yeah, there is accessible capital. It's not what it used to be. I was having a conversation with one of my members just earlier this week in Casper about who operates here, but also operates in other basins, and they are essentially needing to put on hold projects in Wyoming because their own investors are challenging challenging the carbon output. So there's I don't want to minimize that that is a challenge for them, but I do think, and I don't want to imply that it's not currently a problem because of that. Part of that, I think, is the performative nature of what some components of ESG are. ESG, of course, is environmental, social, and governance. And so all three of those things combined, I would argue that many of my members and in the fossil fuel industry writ large do an excellent job of already. I mean, in point of fact, the reason why emissions are so much lower, the reason why the United States carbon emissions is going down while places like China and India and others are going up and up and up, is because my members and others invest so much in that. And so a part of it is what I mean about getting past this performative part and talking about real efforts, carbon sequestration and utilization, the artificial intelligence and drone technology to capture leak, to spot and arrest potential methane leaks, better ways at capturing waste gas and all of that. All of that is happening in our industry, and that is true environmental and the environmental part of ESG. All of that is fine as long as we're allowed the space and not sort of punitively punished on behalf of the global demand somehow. So I don't know if I'm making sense there. There's good parts to it as long as we're allowed to be a part of it.
Any further questions, committee? Well, I have one specifically regarding the potential increased royalty rates in addition to bonus bids and rental rates as part of this report, and certainly been part of the discussion for a while here when it comes to our federal partners. Any indication as to the path forward for that potential? I know that there's a legislation currently being considered by Congress, which would include that those rate increases, but is also a potential, if say the bill doesn't pass with that provision in it, that the federal government can accomplish similar objectives through administrative means. Just a little bit more discussion as to the potential of that happening and I guess the timeline and the method by which the proponents of such a measure might be able to achieve it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen with reconciliation. It seems to be kind of in the hands of a senator from West Virginia at this point. You are right, though, that if that bill does not pass, the Department of Interior does have ways to do that themselves. And so if I were to guess, I would say that it's probably likely that a royalty rate will increase. To that end, just jumping ahead on your agenda a little bit, I sure do appreciate the draft bill in front of this committee to think fairly about how to kind of keep Wyoming whole, but also to also keep Wyoming competitive when we're talking about taxes here, but also federal taxes, and to try to make sure the projects can still move forward here. I think it's a clever bit of legislation there, so appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions for the Patrolman Association? All right, well, once again, appreciate all you do for your industry and as a consequence for the state, Mr. Obermiller. Hopefully you'll be able to stick around for the rest of the morning. Is that the plan, or?
I will stick around, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, well then, if there's no further questions, we'll just continue on. Mr. Dietai is here in person, and yeah, welcome to the select committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Travis Dietai, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association, and I'm pleased to be here in person. It's been a long time since I've sat before this committee. In fact, I can't remember the last time, so it's an honor, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, to be able to sit up here and visit with you today and kind of discuss some of the federal issues that are facing, that my members are facing right now. And the way I'd like to kind of do this, if the committee would indulge me, I'll just speak individually to our industry sectors, starting with coal, talk a little bit about uranium, and then Trona, and then Mr. Sylvester is here from Wyoming, and he's going to hit the Bentonite, and I won't steal a lot of his thunder, but you know, I'll start with a little update of where we are in the coal industry. We're doing well. Things are doing pretty good, and it's a supply demand thing. You know, I've been screaming from the rooftops for the last 10 years that you got to keep coal in the mix, keep coal in the mix. And when the rubber hits the road and gas prices are high, and when renewables, as we saw last winter, aren't reliable, you fall back on coal. And what's happening right now is you're seeing the utilities trying that burn through those stockpiles over the last 4 or 5 years, looking to replace them, because I think there's a little bit of angst out there with gas prices where they are, and with some of the gun shyness, I guess, from what happened with ERCOT down in Texas, and with the predictions of a cold winter. You're going to need coal. So what's happening right now is the utilities are buying a lot of coal, and we are working as hard as we can to meet the demand. And it unfortunately is a situation where you can't just ramp up and start producing a few more million tons overnight. It's a manpower issue right now in the Powder River Basin. We could use about 250, 300 more coal miners up there right now to meet the demand. We are starting to see some issues with rail cars, and nothing nefarious about it, but they're in the same position, I think, that a lot of American businesses are right now, with getting people hired and employed and staffing up so that they can meet the demand. But regardless, the prices are high. I've never, in my time with the Mining Association, I haven't seen coal prices where they are on the spot market. They're almost 3 times what they usually are. That's good for our industry, but it is certainly a reflection on the demand and the supply.
Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Yes,
Dietai, so what is the current spot market?
Current spot price is about $30 for 8,800 BTU coal.
Okay, thank you.
It usually runs between, you know, $12 and $13. And I think what you're seeing right now is, you know, it's reflective of supply and demand. We are doing some more short-term contracts. You're not going to see the 10-year contracts that we used to do, you know, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, but you're seeing some, you know, 3 and 4 year contracts. And of course, those are negotiated and those are confidential, what they're selling it for. But, you know, business is good right now for the coal industry, and we're going to have a couple of pretty good years. So I think that's the good part of it. The bad side and the concerning side is what's going on at the federal level. And I'll start with what's the Department of Interior, the review of the BLM federal coal leasing program. This is a repeat of what we saw during the Obama administration, looking at the federal coal program. And I'll say right now, the federal coal leasing program works. We get a tremendous bang for the buck from federal coal, especially in Wyoming. You know, over the last 30 years, I believe it's $2.6 billion has gone to build schools all across Wyoming in every single county. It keeps the tax burden low on the citizens of Wyoming when coal pays the bills. So we get a tremendous bang from the buck from the federal coal leasing program. And unfortunately, with the folks in control in Washington, D.C. right now, it pretty much comes down to the program needs to be reviewed because we don't think you're paying enough for the coal. There's not much more to it than that. If you would have asked me a couple of concerns with the review, if you would have asked me a few months ago whether we had to worry about a moratorium being reinstated on federal coal, I would probably have said no. There aren't, I actually think there are 2 leases pending right now, but they're not going anywhere. We've had some leases withdrawn. The companies have enough coal for the foreseeable future, and it doesn't look like they're going to be leasing much more in the foreseeable future. But given where we are today and, some eyes opening up and, that we are going to need coal and we are going to need to access those resources, who's to say that we won't see some more leases here, 4 or 5 years down the line. So today, I would say there is concern about, when the review comes out of recommendations of a moratorium on federal coal leasing, because and I think it's kind of been alluded to here. The modus operandi of the people in power right now is to shut down industry. It is to keep the coal in the ground. It's to keep the oil and gas in the ground, and it is performative. It's not sound policy. But I think, that we can expect to see, it wouldn't surprise me if there is a recommendation for a moratorium to keep that coal in the ground, period. But the other side of it is, and we fully expect this, is an increase in the royalty rate. The federal royalty rate right now on surface coal is 12.5%. We've already seen efforts in Congress to raise that to 18%. That was included in the original infrastructure bill, it was included in the original House version of the reconciliation bill, and that was pulled out. But we've seen those efforts already from Congress to raise that royalty rate. So I fully expect when the federal coal program review comes out that we're going to see an increase in the royalty rate. Don't have to panic just yet on that, because that it won't change overnight. They'll have to go through some rulemaking to make that happen, and that will take some time. And with any luck, we may have a change of the gavel in Washington, D.C. that can slow that down and change that. But that's very concerning. The other part we're really concerned with is with the reconciliation bill. There is anti-coal language in there. Specifically, the one that gives us the most heartburn is the $2 federal severance tax per ton. And that would, in effect, again, going towards the goal of making the resource non-economical to mine, that goes a long way to that. So that's something we're very concerned about. Senator Barrasso and his staff, both in his personal office and on the Energy Committee, have been great on this, and they're working very hard. We're hopeful that, with Senator Barrasso working with Senator Manchin, we'll be able to rewrite that and hopefully pull that back. But that is very concerning. And again, it's just driving up the cost of producing the mineral. And, I often hear legislators from your side of the dais say, what can we do to help the industry? What can we do to help the industry? I would tell you right now, I think it is very appropriate for the body to consider a reduction in the severance tax for coal of 1%. That would help the industry. The discussion about capital, access to capital, I think that dovetails right into that discussion. If a coal company is allowed to keep a little bit more capital, they can invest more in equipment, they can invest more in people, they can invest more in reclamation, and they could keep doing the job that they need to do in Wyoming. So I think that is that is, it's an appropriate time to address that and have a look at that.
Mr. Vitae, real quick, a little bit more information on that proposed $2 per ton for severance tax, federal severance tax.
Yes.
Is that a brand new concept? Is there currently a federal severance tax on federal coal? And if not, was a proposal, is a proposal to also treat that like federal mineral royalties and that the state have a share of that?
Mr. Chairman, to my, there is no federal severance tax right now. This is a new concept. How that would be divided, whether it would be a 50, I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think, in the bill itself, it just says a $2 per ton federal severance tax. How it would be divvied right now, it would seem that the feds would get it all. So, and again, there's no detail on that, but it is a new concept. And it's, again, that whole idea of we don't think you're paying enough, so we're going to slap some more taxes on you.
Mr. Detail, just a reminder, it's been a long week for me of committee meetings and other meetings, and you've been part of some of those. What is the current severance tax rate in Wyoming for coal?
Mr. Chairman, we are at 8%.
Thank you.
And that is the highest. Oil and gas is at 7%, and then Trona is down to 2%. I'm sorry, that's the federal royalty rate, but the severance tax for coal is at 8% for surface coal. And that's kind of where we are on the coal side of things. I'll jump in a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about uranium. There is a general sense of optimism with the industry right now, just kind of given where we are in the state with the Terra Power project and some of the stuff that's coming down from the federal level. There does seem to be a little bit more support for developing more nuclear capabilities in the United States right now, and Wyoming is right in the mix of that. So there is some general optimism. In the infrastructure bill that recently passed, there was $75 million, $75 million appropriated for the domestic uranium stockpile. That's half of what we had hoped for. It was supposed to be $150 million. We got 75 million. Right now, the Department of Energy is figuring out how to actually stand up that program. And when it does, that will be a boost to our uranium producers. Our producers right now are basically in standby. The amount of uranium that we are producing is negligible. Not quite like the coal industry. They can ramp up almost immediately and start producing when it's time to produce. And so there is that general sense of optimism out there with the uranium industry. We do have concerns. Under the Obama administration, the Environmental Protection Agency was very aggressive towards the industry. We feel like we're kind of in the calm before the storm right now with the current Environmental Protection Agency. But we do see some stuff coming down the road, in particular with groundwater reclamation, restoration regulation that we have fought for a decade and took it down to the wire under the Obama administration and eventually got it shelved, but we fully see that coming back again. So we're going to have to deal with that at some point in time. But other than that, our guys are in standby waiting to go. And again, that general sense of optimism out there.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Detail, before you move on from uranium and other mining, have your members seen the slow walking of leasing, whether it be rare earth minerals or uranium leases, if there even has been applications for leasing? It appears that they just don't flat want to lease, and they're delay, deny is kind of the modus operandi for them.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, excuse me. With regards to uranium, it is not a leased mineral. It's a locatable, and we do a lot of stuff on state land and federal land. The permitting process on federal land and this is long. It's no different than anything else. We do have a little bit more luck on state land. But the answer to your question is it's just a long time when you're dealing with whether it's Department of Interior, whether BLM, whether it's EPA, or whether it's the NEPA. It's a long process, and 7 years So, yeah, we do. We have those same issues.
Mr. Detail, I'd ask you to digress maybe a little bit. What's your feelings on the state leasing processes for everything? Do we need to streamline them? Do we need to modify them? We can't do much with federal, but we can sure do it with state.
Mr. Chairman, I would say any efforts to streamline are welcome. That's how I would answer that. We do have a pretty good working relationship industry-wide with the Department of Environmental Quality. As I mentioned before, other committees, I can mention to you here, for my industry sectors, we have working groups that meet either quarterly or monthly with their contemporaries in the Department of Environmental Quality. And that's where these issues arise. And we kind of identify them, you know, we can do something here, and then we work with the regulators to try to address those. So we do have a process in place that we do, but on the legislative side, if there's anything that can be done to streamline, you know, it's certainly welcome. Certainly welcome. I will jump really quickly to the Trona side.
Before you do,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
and just to be clear, there, it sounds like there isn't quite as much of a discussion around uranium as there is around coal or oil and gas when it comes to just a very specific increase in, obviously there's no royalty rate, but or is there anything, I guess is the question.
You know, I would thank you, Mr. Chairman, because there is one issue, and again, this kind of will dovetail into Mr. Sylvester's comments, I'm sure. There was an effort, and I believe it was in the House version of the reconciliation bill earlier, to add provisions that would, I guess, modify the General Mining Act of 1872. And in those provisions were a couple of things that were pretty nefarious, including the implementing a federal royalty rate on locatable minerals, bentonite, uranium, gold, on federal lands. There is no federal royalty on those things right now, and there is good reason for that. It's a 100-year-old law, 100-plus-year-old law with a lot of promulgated rules to it, and there is reasons why there is not a federal royalty rate on locatable minerals. So there were efforts to implement that in the earlier version of the reconciliation bill. In addition to other things, which were one in particular, an 8 cent per ton charge on the dirt you move to get to your to get to the mineral, which doesn't sound like 8 cents, doesn't sound like much, but it would be an administrative nightmare to try to figure out how much earth you're moving. And again, that I think more towards the larger gold mines in Nevada. But you know, it would impact our guys too. It would impact our bentonite guys, our uranium guys. There was an excellent hearing before the Senate Energy Committee where we worked with Senator Barrasso to say, hey, you got to bring these things up, and we've got to vet these issues before you stick this stuff in the reconciliation bill. David Brown, CEO of Wyoming, was out there, did an excellent job of testimony. It was actually a great hearing, and I would recommend, if you have some time before bed, to go back and watch it. But that issue is out there too, and I think we can fully expect in the next, in the coming months, in the short term, to see a hard review of the mining of the General Mining Act of 1872 to try to. There are people that want to try to do this, that want to try to put a gross royalty tax on a gross royalty rate on locatable minerals, and that would make it tough for our producers here.
Just a quick follow-up, is that, if say that is not including reconciliation bill?
That was pulled in the final House version. So, but we fully expect the issue to come back again.
Right, and so my question is that does the federal government have the ability to do that administratively? It seems like it might be a little bit different than increasing the existing royalty rate. It's just clarify, make sure that's not something they could still pursue even if.
I am not sure they can do that administratively. Yeah, I think they could. Yeah, there's no doubt, Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner. I don't think no doubt that they would try, but I think that has to be done through a change in the statute.
Mr. Chairman, in relation to uranium, I'm reading a energy writer here talking about nuclear and all the countries that are thinking about going that way all over Europe. Of course, France is huge, but they're adding the modular units also. But Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania, just a few of the countries that are looking to turn to nuclear to meet their requirements that 200 countries agreed to in the recent climate talks. That would sound to me like uranium is going to get real sought after and expensive. I'm wondering if we shouldn't be stockpiling uranium right now, since we don't produce enough in the United States to even take care of our needs. If these European countries take our source away in Europe, we're going to be really behind the 8 ball on uranium. What can we do with that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, we are behind the 8 ball already. And I think the idea of doing the domestic stockpile, which was a concept that came out of President Trump's nuclear fuel cycle working group, not only as a way to get our producers up and going, and so that they don't die, but to address the national security issue and the implications of the national security concept as well. So yeah, I think that $75 million to do it, to start it off, hopefully eventually get it fully funded, and and just start. We can't do it, the uranium, it's not a free market. When you're competing with state-sponsored uranium producers, whether it be Kazakhstan, Russia, China, those are all state-sponsored. And, we all like to say, well, we're all for the free market. Our uranium industry needs federal help, and it needs support. We've got to subsidize it. The prices have been driven so low that we can't produce for what the price is right now. We'd love to see them go up. I think the last time when visiting with my producers, the all-in cost to produce a pound of uranium is anywhere between $50 and $60 right now. So, with prices down around $25, $30, it's just non-economical to produce right now.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Detail, do you think the state should be helping with that federal plan? If they're only put up 75 million, maybe Wyoming should put up another 75 million to get our producers moving on this thing, not New Mexico or anywhere else, but the Wyoming producers.
Mr. Chairman, I think we'd be very open to that. I think that would be, if the state wants to buy uranium, I think I would say we're looking for anybody to buy it right now. That's an interesting concept, Senator Anderson.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Detail, roughly, just how much uranium do you get for $75 million for a stockpile? And in what form is the uranium? I mean, that's not pure uranium we're going to keep. It'll probably be yellow cake or some other form.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Burkhart, I think that it is yellow cake, and the amount you would get would depend on the price you're willing to pay for it. So that the producers are going to come and say, we can produce it for this much. Is the federal government going to pay $60 a pound? I don't know. And I think those are some of the questions that are that they're looking at the Department of Energy right now in Washington, D.C., as to how much are you going to buy for $75 million? That's a great question, though, Chairman Burkhart. But I would think I would follow up on that. We were on a meeting was it yesterday or 2 days ago with the domestic stockpile, and I had a conversation with Senator Barrasso's staff yesterday. With that domestic stockpile, as they get it going, we've got to find a place in the United States where the stockpile is going to be, and Wyoming should be that place right now. And there is another opportunity. And again, I think this falls back into the general optimism with the uranium industry, is that, you can spin it off into the broader nuclear efforts of the state and get that facility here in Wyoming, and then jumpstart it, catapult it on to, HALEU enrichment for these small modular reactors that we're on the cutting edge of right here in Wyoming right now.
Mr.
Chairman.
Oh, go ahead.
So, Mr. Detai, talking about a stockpile here, about how big of a facility would you need? Do you have any idea? I'm just curious.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how big that facility would have to be.
Okay.
Ideally, it would be huge and we'd have a heck of a lot of uranium in it. But I don't know the answer to that. Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the question was how much yellow cake would we get? If we paid the reasonable price of $60 a pound, we get 2.5 million pounds. And I don't know what size facility that'd be, but that's 150 million if Wyoming put in 75 with the feds 75.
And just to follow up on that, it's easy, like you talk about stockpile, is it stored in any one location? Do you know any of the details about that, or does this exist currently? Is that something that's also under discussion?
Mr. Chairman, the question of where the stockpile, it does not exist right now. It would have to be, I think that's the discussion. We would have to build the facility somewhere in this country to stockpile the uranium.
Okay, any further questions, committee? And perhaps that's something, if it's so long as we love building buildings around here, I don't know if that'd be part of the discussion or not, but Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, we had a stockpile in the early 70s. The federal government was buying yellow cake from us for $50 a pound right up till 81. And they were stockpiling it. So they've got someplace strategic stockpile that maybe we could use. Not that I want to use theirs. I'd like to stockpile it here, but.
Right. Well, maybe that's something you can follow up, Mr. Detai, and if there isn't, whether it's a current location that they got a place in mind, wouldn't hurt, if there's a few extra jobs in Wyoming, if that location is up for grabs, and maybe there's a little something that we could throw in to sweeten the deal. It seems how we have.
Mr. Chairman, and that was the specific purpose of the conversation that I had with Senator Barrasso's staff on that is working the stockpile issue in Washington, D.C. The first thing to get done is to actually get the government to buy the uranium, which they've got to figure out how to do, and then the second step is to where you're going to put it, and they've Senator Barrasso's office has flagged that. So, and we want to build it in Wyoming. We want it stored in Wyoming.
Okay, well, let us know how the state may be able to help. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Winter.
Mr. Chairman, back to coal. I know one of the requests Mr. Detai is making is a 1% decrease of the severance, I believe it was. And I'm thinking it might be a little hard to push that through the legislature when we're making $30 a ton on coal. I think it might be a little hard push. Maybe it'd be a little easier when we're down there at that $12 or $13. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would, I see where you're coming from, but I would disagree. The tax burden on the industry is, we're not mining 450 million tons of coal like we were a decade ago. The tax burden on the industry needs to be right-sized. And, 7% to make us for some parity with oil and gas, which my colleague, Mr. Obermuller, we're all friends here in Wyoming with oil and gas and coal, but we are competitors at some point, and that 1% parity with oil and gas would be helpful.
Okay. Representative Burr does have a quick follow-up based off that. We'll get to Representative.
It's a follow-up to Senator Anderson's question, and Mr. Detai, I'd ask that you don't take time here, but if you could give us the information, what would be the benefit to the state and the people of Wyoming to reduce that 1%?
Mr. Chairman, I can
here.
get that to you, but what I can give to you right now is we've heard for years and years that we need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and on the coal industry. And I would just put out that that's a great place to start, is to start reduce our reliance on coal taxes by giving us a break.
There you go.
Thank you. My question is, we all know that there was a sale of uranium to the Russians, and I was wondering do you know if that sale affected the uranium supply in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, I believe you're talking about when the Russians purchased Uranium One, their assets in Wyoming. I don't think it did not make much of a difference as far as production. But I'm glad you brought that up, Representative Winters, because something that did not get a lot of play here recently, Uranium One's assets have been acquired by Uranium Energy Corporation out of Texas. And it is now the largest uranium producer in the United States. And for all intents and purposes, the Russians are out of Wyoming. Yeah.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several years ago, there was some interest in underground coal gasification because it produces clean syngas and some other things. Is there anything in the current series of bills that are coming out of DC? Is there anything in there that incentivizes underground coal gasification?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, I don't think so. I think that I haven't heard much about that concept for probably 6 or 7 years, and I don't know if anybody is pursuing that right now. That was something that I know a couple of companies were looking at doing, but that is just kind of dropped off the radar screen, Representative. Mr. Chairman, if I could, I will shift very briefly.
Before you do that, one more question.
Oh,
When
yeah.
it comes to coal. You mentioned increase in price. I just wonder if you had any inclination what the change in production has been in rough terms. Coal production, has that gone up as well, and by how much?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, coal has been running. You look at the week-to-week numbers; it's anywhere between up 7 to 10% per week. So we're gonna be up about 10%, I would think, from last year. And I don't like to make predictions, especially about the future. But we're probably going to be at least the way it's tracking right now. We're going to be at least about 230 million tons, and that's about. I think that's roughly 20 million tons over last year.
Well, I think that kind of leads into, the discussion about if we are to pursue a severance tax decrease, like Senator Harrison said. I don't know if that's likely or not, but I think the calculation would be between the increase in the price and production, that we're going to see a significant increase in tax revenue from coal. And wouldn't this be the right time to reduce the severance tax and still, probably from our perspective, still see an increase in revenue from your industry, but just not as significant? And to your point, that would reduce our reliance on your industry to fund public services, and then at a time when we could potentially make that change and still see an increase. So
Understood.
Yeah.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, I will just speak a little bit to the Trona industry. I don't think there are a lot of federal pressures facing that industry. It's kind of under the radar right now. We did get a federal royalty reduction from 6% to 2% last year. And that's largely a competitive thing. We worked very hard. And again, Senator Barrasso and the rest of the delegation were very key in doing that. The competition for our natural soda ash comes from China, synthetic soda ash from China, and it is cutthroat competition. And so that reduction in the royalty rate in 2020 is a competitiveness issue, and to help keep us competitive for our soda ash. And again, with the spending spree that's going on in Washington DC right now, and the folks in power looking for money wherever they can get it, it's, you know, we're fairly comfortable that the royalty rate would stay where it is, but there's always concern that that might go up again. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions and turn it over to my friend, Mr. Sylvester from Wyoming, to talk about Bentonite.
All right, looks like we have a question from Representative Wire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last year, there was a non-renewal of the tax exemption for the rail car facility that services the Trona industry. And during that conversation, some of the fears were that it would be moved out of state, maybe to North Platte or something like that. At this time, do you have a feel for what's going on there? And is there something that we should be aware of or be thinking about? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure where the companies, whether they're moving out or not, but I can say that the prices have gone up for the producers, because they pay the for the I can't even think of remember the term right now, but they do pay, and that the companies are passing those costs on to the producers. It's not significant, it's not crushing, but their prices have gone up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Detail, while, you know, it looks like things for the Trona industry are stable right now.
Yes.
I've had discussions with that industry, and I know they have some real concern over China producing artificial Trona. So what can we as the state of Wyoming do to help our Trona industry, considering we sit on the world's largest supply of natural Trona?
Mr. Chairman, immediately, I think the discussion is going to come up once again in the legislature when we're looking at revenue generation, of elimination of some of the exemptions, whether it's on industrial, you know, the industrial rates or taxes on services, that sort of thing. I think to keep the tax burden low is what I think the best thing for that you can do for the Trona industry from where you sit. Don't add to the tax burden, because the competition is pretty fierce, and things are looking pretty good in the Trona patch right now. You're going to see some expansions. They're going to hire some people, and you know that the future is pretty bright for those guys.
Any further questions? Senator Biden.
Quickly, Mr. Chairman, I would just add, I've been trying since I've been in office in 2017 to lower the severance tax on coal. And I was looking at all the failed votes we've had. 2017 Revenue Committee killed it. 2019 Revenue Committee killed it. 2020 didn't even get brought up for a vote. And I think one of those years since I've been on Minerals Committee, I think I even offered it as a Minerals Committee sponsor bill, and we killed it, that idea in Minerals Committee. So it's been a long road. I remember the comments about coal is dead. We need to just throw dirt on you and move on. Here you are saying, how do you like me now? Just keep that in mind as we prepare for this next session, that we do need to reduce the severance tax on coal, and be ready. I think this might be the year we could get it done, Mr. Detail.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Beitman. And I would say it is time, because the industry has changed significantly from where we were a decade ago. And it's time to right size the tax burden for the industry. Mr. Chairman, I would just end with this. You're going to be discussing your draft bill, and I want to just give our support to that. That's an excellent concept, and just hopefully you never have to use it, but if you do, it's some protection for the industry and for the state.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and hopefully you'll stick around for that specific discussion coming up
Mr.
next.
Detail, you did drop your glasses on the floor. kind of behind you a little bit. I
I-
didn't want you to step on.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Burkhart, thank you. I drop stuff all the time and I appreciate it. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, sir. Okay, next up, we have Mr. Sylvester with Wildman. Welcome to the Select Federal Natural Resource Management Committee. Look forward to your testimony.
Chairman Boner, Chairman Burkhart, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to provide an update to the Select Federal Natural Resource Management Committee of Wild Bend's permitting status for our coal draw project and current general discussion of the 1872 mining law reform that's being considered in the House for the budget reconciliation bill, proposing new royalty on locatable minerals, a new 7-cent reclamation fee on hard rock minerals, an increase in the annual federal claim maintenance fee. My name is Joseph Sylvester. I am a natural resource manager for Wild Bend, and we're a 70-year-old small family-owned and managed mining company, as well as manufacturing business with headquarters in Billings, Montana, and our operations are in the Bighorn Basin. Wild Bend directly employs 140 associates. We also have an indirect employment of 60 additional for our mining contractor that extracts the mineral from the ground and then transports it to our facilities. The wages, when combined with the local goods and services that we purchase, have a significant impact on the economics of the rural towns and counties in Bighorn Basin where we operate. Wild Bend is pleased to update you on the status of our coal mine or coal draw project that we had briefed you back in May 26. At that point in time, our project was on hold, waiting for review from the BLM and was in DC. On July 20th, when I was out in the field, we received a phone call that we received the finding of no significant impact and our project was able to advance. The delayed approval was authorized only after receiving support from this committee, from Senator Cheney, Senator Brasso, and Congresswoman Lummis. As you may recall, Wild Bend submitted the plan of operation to the DEQ and Bureau of Land Management in September 25th of 2014. The DEQ approved the plan of operations in 2015, September 1st. And since that time, Wild Bend dealt directly with the BLM on various Section 106 issues, as we had previously discussed on the May 26th meeting. The primary questions was, one, does the BLM and State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, can they require compensatory offsite mitigation? The second part of that was also whether tribal monitoring was needed and who should pay for it, who's responsible for that. And number three, whether and to what degree annual field monitoring that was included in the memorandum of agreement, if it was necessary. So in the end, Wild Bend conformed under duress to the requirements of the compensatory offsite mitigation, the use of tribal monitors, and will be paying for the annual field monitoring during mine disturbance, since the project was stalled and had no hope of advancing without us conforming to that. So at this point in time, any questions on this first topic?
Sure. Just, well, first of all, glad that, you're able to finally get that permit after what, 7-8 years and
6 years,
6
10
years.
months, 22 days.
now that you're counting. I just want, do you have any estimate as far as the cost of all that, of the offsite mitigation, of funding for a monitor, just a little bit, and what, just a little, if you give specifics, what does that mean, offsite mitigation? What did you have to do to, I guess, please the folks that were claiming to be affected?
Mr. Chairman, so the total overall cost of what that mitigation is going to run us is somewhere between 100 and 150,000 throughout the duration of the project. The project should last somewhere between 7 and 12 years, depending on what our demand is at the facility and the demand. So hopefully it's 7 years and we'll be able to get that out of the ground and move on to the next. And so.
Any further questions, committee? Please continue.
So just to give you a little bit background on sodium bentonite, Wyoming mines this sodium bentonite, which is one member of a group of minerals as industrial minerals. These minerals, which are produced in high volumes, have low margins and are widely used in products we rely on our daily lives. While bentonite is found in many other parts of the world, the bentonite found in Wyoming and bordering states is exceptional in its quality characteristics, so much that it is known as Wyoming bentonite. And it's the benchmark for bentonite quality around the world. Wyoming bentonite is a base material to create hundreds of different products that are sold worldwide. It is used to bind and create sand molds to cast the engine blocks for your car, your truck. Municipal landfills use it as an environmental. If you didn't use it, it would not form an impermeable bottom liner that prevents landfill leachate from contaminating groundwater sources. Streams and lakes would be far dirtier if contaminants were not removed from industrial waste before discharge using Wyoming bentonite. It'd be difficult to drill any kind of well or install the miles of telecommunications and utility lines buried throughout the country without using Wyoming bentonite as the drilling mud. The wine, beer, fruit, juice that you enjoy would be unpalatably cloudy if not for Wyoming bentonite used to clarify it. And you'd be very unhappy if not for Wyoming bentonite's unique properties that allow your cat's waste to form odorless clumps for easy removal from the litter box. While a large percentage of the bentonite mined in Wyoming is used domestically, about 20% is sold outside of North America. And this is due to exceptional performance characteristics exhibited by the bentonite. They're not easily duplicated by foreign sources of the clay. Despite this, there is significant quantities of lower quality foreign bentonites which find their way into the US market due to their low costs. China is the second largest producer of bentonite behind the United States. So it's important for me to note that while around 90% of our bentonite we use for our products is obtained from the mining claims on federal lands administered by the Bureau of Land Management. Our mining is open pit, employing efficient modern mining techniques using scrapers and dozers in a continuous castback sequence. We developed and that places the overburden removed from the one pit directly back into the preceding pit in the pit series. And you have an illustration in your packet there that shows that. This allows us to spread topsoil containing live native seed, plant seed directly onto previously mined and backfilled pits. And so on the average, we have to move anywhere from 8 to 10 cubic yards of overburden topsoil for each cubic yard of bentonite that we mine. The bentonite deposits we mine are very thin, averaging usually 3.5 feet thick, and often run laterally for miles. The disturbance footprint of our pits are relatively small, averaging about 200 foot wide, 400 foot long. And that's a phase that we talk about it here. A typical pit is open for only a matter of months before the overburden topsoil is then replaced and begin our planned revegetation process, which focuses on creating a diverse habitat that blends into the surrounding undisturbed lands. As a result of our mining and reclamation practices, we've been honored to receive numerous awards from state, federal, and non-governmental agencies and industry associations for our exceptional environmental stewardship. Most recently, WyoBen received the 2021 Wyoming Land Quality Division Non-Coal Reclamation Award for the reestablishment of sagebrush on our mined areas. Other awards include the Bureau of Land Management's Hard Rock Mineral Environmental Award, the Interstate Mining Compact Commission's Reclamation Award, non-coal category, several Excellence in Surface Mining Awards from the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, the Wildlife Habitat Reclamation Stewardship Award from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, as well as several Excellence Environmental Performance and Sustainable Development Awards from industry associations. We're proud. We're proud of our reclamation. We do a great job and would love to take you out and show you what we do at any point in time. WyoBen has also seen the BLM permit approval timeline continue to increase over the past 15 years, while the Wyoming DEQ Land Quality Division, which the state of Wyoming has control of, has been able to review and approve the exact same plan of operation within 180 days of submittal with less personnel. WyoBen was encouraged in the 2020 changes in the NEPA process that required timely reviews of permit applications. Page limitations on the NEPA review documents and concurrent processing of the Section 106 requirements with the NEPA process. Unfortunately, these positive steps have been reversed by the current administration. The most recent challenges to our industry has been dealing with its proposed changes to the 1872 mining law. As a small company that operates in an industry segment with inherently low profit margins and that relies heavily on mineral resources from federal lands, our ability to compete in the domestic and international marketplace is dependent on our ability to access and economically mine these resources. This is why any discussion about changing the mining laws, the rules under which we have always operated, is of particular concern to us. Several significant changes to the mining law are being proposed in the hard rock mining section of the House draft of the budget reconciliation bill that is currently being negotiated in Congress. First, this section seeks to establish a new royalty system for hard rock mining of 8% of gross income for all new plans of operations and 4% of gross income for existing plans. While this may be easily borne by larger mining companies, especially those outside of the industrial mineral segment, small industrial mineral companies like WyoBen will be hard pressed to absorb this cost due to our already thin margins. Second, the section seeks to establish a new reclamation fee of 7 cents per ton of displaced material, which has been referred to as the dirt tax, which is defined as unprocessed ore and waste dislodged from its location at the time of mining. This proposal seems to be based on the idea that the states run mine reclamation programs are not doing their job, and additional funds are needed by the federal government to ensure that the mine reclamation is satisfactorily completed. Third, this section seeks to increase the annual claim maintenance fee from $165 to $200 per 20 acres. In 1993, Congress enacted a law requiring payment of the $100 per year per claim as a claim maintenance fee, with the provision that every 5 years they would look at it at the Bureau of Management and could increase the fee by using the Consumer Price Index to adjust it for inflation. This has been done multiple times since then, to the point where the fee is currently $165 from the original $100. In 2012, Congress modified this requirement, making it to apply to 20-acre parcels in a claim rather than each claim. Prior to that, a claim could be as large as 160 acres. And so that we multiplied on several of our claims by 8 times in that change in 2012. There are additional 2 funding provisions that are included in the hard rock mining section. First one provides an additional 2.5 billion for abandoned mine lands to inventory, assess, decommission, reclaim, respond to hazardous substance releases on, and remediate abandoned locatable minerals mine land. The Aml program has been in existence since 1977 when the Surface Mining and Control Act was passed. Since that time, they had collected $11.6 billion. They have appropriated and spent $9.4 billion, leaving a $2.2 billion unappropriated. If additional funds are really needed to address real hard rock mining issues, we need to look no further than to the funds that are annually collected from the current claims maintenance fee. So according to the BLM fiscal year 2019, they collected $71 million in these fees, and less than 40 million actually went to the administration of the program. The remaining 31 million went into the general treasury. If additional funding is really needed for mining related programs, Congress should look at these funds, which should be used for mining related issues collectively. As the previous paragraphs illustrate, any discussions, changes to mining law must recognize that it's an extraordinarily complex issue. There are 149 years of promulgated regulations and case law that must be dealt with thoughtfully and with care. The current reconciliation bill provides neither the time nor the appropriate venue for such a detailed and thoughtful discussion of the issues inherent in such a change. The one-size-fits-all approach to mining law reform put forth in the hard rock mining section will significantly affect our company's ability to remain competitive and perhaps our viability to continue to operate and offer good paying, high quality employment. Further, the negative impact of the proposed mining law changes on the nation's supply chain, as well as on our local communities, would be severe. For all these reasons, we respectfully request the committee to recommend to the full Senate and House. 1, that the hard rock mining section be removed from the final reconciliation bill. They have removed a portion of it, but there still remains some. And so if all of that would be removed is our first ask. Second is to encourage them to have a discussion with all stakeholders to address any proposed changes to the 1872 mining law. 3, create a predictable and a timely review process for future plans of operations, which include review of the NEPA's Section 106, Waters of the U.S., Endangered Species Act, air quality, and so forth. And the final one is encourage Congress and the House to formally recognize essential minerals. We have a listing of critical minerals, but essential minerals such as bentonite that are part of the key materials to manufacture everyday components. As a prior reference, your vehicle, automobile parts, military parts. And so thank you for the opportunity to present this information. I know it was a little lengthy, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have for me now or in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation, and glad to see that we're able to hopefully help a little bit and move things along. Senator Anderson.
I have a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. This section here on page, whatever it is, page 3, I guess, is the 8% of gross income and the 4% of gross income. Those are both new royalty systems set up, or are they increases?
Mr. Chairman, And Senator Anderson, yes, these are new proposed royalties, fees, taxes, and that they are included in that House bill.
Okay, then on the next page, Mr. Chairman, it says additionally, 2 funding provisions are also included in the Hard Rock section. And then you go on to discuss the AML program, 2.5 billion that would be coming out of your industry, I guess, as opposed to the coal industry, or how's that all work?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, that's still, I don't think we have an accurate description of where that is going to go and where it's going to come from, but I believe that part of the additional proposed new royalties would be a part of that solution to go in and pay for that additional funding.
And it says there's 2 funding provisions. I'm
sorry.
I'm looking at just one there with the abandoned.
Yes, there is. And it fell out of here. There is additional funding so that they can review the NEPA process for undue and unnecessary degradation. And I hate to give you a number off, but there is additional funding source that they were looking for. And that was not from these fees, but just from the general budget, that they were going to pull that out and put that in there to be able to analyze and review what's needed. I will edit these, Mr. Chairman. I will edit these and get the corrected and get that language back in here so you have a complete
Yeah,
document.
that'd be great. That'd be great. Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Sylvester, for your testimony, and thanks for hanging in there and not giving up. Boy, those 3, whether it's the maintenance fee increase, that affects everybody. That affects uranium claims, everything, and that's not good. The dirt tax is a terrible, stupid idea. And the, I forgot what the royalty. What is your sense on what the chances of any of those 3 or all 3 of those making it through this reconciliation bill and becoming law? Is this a possibility that those could be done this year?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Biteman, for this year, I think we have dodged the bullet at this point in time, but you know, when it comes to the late hours, all of a sudden something gets thrown, and especially in this reconciliation bill, it would be easier for them to put that in there, have the number of votes that they want. Thank goodness for Senator Manchin and Senator Seminole, that they were saying, whoa, put the brakes on here. We're trying to change something and just quickly insert this in and be able to change law overnight. And that's where it could happen, is in the reconciliation. If we actually sat down and discussed it and thought it out strategically, and the different margins on these products locatable, at the testimony, you had the hard rock mining, gold there, their profit margins are severely higher than what bentonite industry is. And so they could probably absorb this, and they testified to that yes, they would be willing to increase that. We would like to have a discussion on that. But to answer your question, the likelihood of this going through is very slim, but it's still on the table and has been on the table since Harry Reid. And so every year it comes back.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and a follow-up, you mentioned 90% of your bentonite comes from federal claims, so they could potentially put you out of business, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Biteman. There's been a continual creep of regulatory transgression over these 15 years. And I personally was working on the permitting process, and we see that as one thing gets resolved, Endangered Species Act, and then they move on to a next, and then archaeology has been my latest push in the last 7 years. We've just seen a continual creep and ask for more and more. When we submit a plan of operation to the BLM, to the DEQ, we try to mitigate. We have a upfront meeting with both agencies and say, what can we do to make our packet better and take care of everything up front, which is great. It's a great concept, and to address it so that you can process this a lot quicker. To tell you a story of what happened to us down in Thermopolis on one of our permits is we knew that there was a site up on top of a hill. We went down, we looked at what our current buffers were. We adjusted that boundary, increased it. We took out of that any mining that would impact that area. We get down to the section 106 and I am told, okay, we've read your plan of operation. We need more. And I'm like, we've already mitigated this up front. And I was told, no, we need more mitigation. And so bottom line, to me, it feels like we need to pull the checkbook out day one and say, what do you need? What size of check do you need at this point in time? On that particular project, we had to write a $20,000 check, handed it to the government. The government then took it and did the mitigations for that project.
Last follow-up.
Okay.
So looking at the bentonite industry as a whole and the critical and essential raw materials that this country needs for our supply chain, do most of these materials fall under federal minerals, or is there a possibility to just bypass the feds and mine these on the private and state land? Is there enough to make it work on fee and state?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, there is private leases, and we have some private, and we have 34 state leases as well that we mine on. The private leases is you've got to reach out there, figure out and negotiate how that's going to be. But bentonite is a finite resource. We have the best bentonite in the world here in the state of Wyoming. And to be able to solely rely on private lands is a challenge. Other companies do not rely as heavily on the federal government as Wyoming, and we're earlier in the patenting process and got those federal lands patented, and so that they're operating on those. So it's a little bit easier for them to navigate those waters.
Okay, so you mentioned, the request to us write another letter to our federal delegation, but you're also headquartered in Montana. Mentioned a few moderate senators from the Democrat side. Also, there's Senator Tester up in Montana. Obviously, that would be another, frankly, far more fruitful, I think, avenue of advocacy than trying to go through our state delegation, since I'm assuming there's very little that we disagree with. Have you just reached out to the Montana delegation at all? And if so, what has that conversation been like?
Mr. Chairman, so back when we were working on the Coal Draw project, we went back, our CEO, our Vice President, David Brown, and Richard Brown, myself, our plant operations manager for Wyoming, we all traveled back to DC. At that point in time, we met with all of our delegation, Wyoming delegation, as well as the Montana delegation. We have very good support from Montana. Senator Tester, when we sat down with him, he had a little bit more questions, wanting additional monies for AML lands reclamation. And so we updated him on our reclamation practice and where we're at with that. And so don't have as much support from that office, but I think that if we can show something that's beneficial for his constituents, because we're mining in Montana as well. And we also have now a new kitty litter packaging facility in Montana, which the resources come from Thermopolis. And so it's a joint state that we cross over.
And so have you engaged with this office with these particular concerns you've expressed here today with the reconciliation package?
Not with the Reconciliation Act. We have not, well, let me restate that. Our president, David Brown, when he was back to testify, he met with several. And I'm not sure exactly which Montana representatives were visited with.
I'll just reiterate that. I mean, from my perspective, just, looking at it for the past, 20 minutes or so, that would be the most advantageous course of advocacy, assuming, of course, our delegation and the Republicans from Montana are going to be in support of your position. Perhaps Senator Tester might be the key in the split Senate. So anyways, go ahead, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sylvester, I'm just curious, the archaeological site you mentioned where you did mitigation and then was required to do additional. What was the nature of that site? Was it one flake, one broken point, an entire village?
Oh, there was, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. So the site, I can't give you the exact details, but there was antelopes trap site, maybe a eagle catch. And this is all up to interpretation. There were some cairns that were up there. And then also there was a large flat stone, which was next to a cairn, which was determined as a significant find and qualified under the Antiquities Act to be protected.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So for your $20,000 worth of extortion money, what did they do with the site? What was done with it? I'm just curious.
Yep, Mr. Chairman. So on that particular project, they wanted better detailed drafting, drawings, view shed, landscape analysis. And then also we brought in tribal elders and other members of the Wind River Reservation to come and look at the site and educate them on the site.
So one final follow-up. So what is the nature of the site now? Is it still there?
Yeah.
Did they haul it all off to some other state for study, or what did they do?
No, Mr. Chairman, that site is protected. And what our stance was is this is not a pristine area. We had the Hot Springs County Airport that's visible. We have the highway between Thermopolis and Meeteetse, which runs 1,632 cars average daily up and down this road, that had the exact same view shed as what we had, if not more. And I was told that we look at the mitigation on a case by case basis.
Thank you.
The sites still remain there today, exactly where they were.
Anything for us to pick up? Never mind. Thank you.
It's, and to be clear, there's no actual disturbance of the site. You're talking about the indirect AP or the view shed or whatever they want to call it.
Right, Mr. Chairman. There is no impact other than a indirect. And so that seems to be the new, there's a direct impact and a indirect impact. And the visual is the big thing that we have seen, the regulatory creep over time. There's no changes in the regulations, section 106, 800 regs, but it is just the interpretation and how far you can push this issue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sylvester, you mentioned that China is the largest or the second largest producer of bentonite in the world. Could you tell us what the quality of their bentonite is compared to Wyoming's?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, thank you for the question. Their quality is more of a calcium bentonite. It's a lower quality. And so with the sodium bentonite, the Wyoming bentonite has better properties of absorption. And so the swelling factor, and that's what you see with the kitty litter, or whether it's, if you're drilling a well, it helps seal the formation so that you don't have the cuttings coming and going into different various formations. And so it has a sealing property as well. I'm sure you've been out there in the hills when it's been wet and it's not something that you really want to be just because of the viscosity or the slipperiness of the bentonite. And so our bentonite is the best, and I'm proud of that.
I have another question. You indicate that the BLM have really slowed up on their analysis of these requests from you folks. Could you give us some idea of what that entails or why it slowed up so much?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter. So when we first started it, and 8 years ago, the first project, we were given a direct APE. This is where your mine is. Go out there, evaluate it, do a class 3 survey where the archaeologists come out, walk across there, and they identify these resources. Great. I mean, this is good. We fully support that. There's a 100-foot buffer that they put out there just in case we have incidental movement outside of that approved disturbance boundary. The transgression that we've seen since then is, okay, now up to 3 miles. And so the next project, which was my 10 claims over by Tin Sleep, they just said, go out there and see if you can find anything. Well, when you are paying a contractor and they say up to 3 miles, all of a sudden that's a lot of land that someone's got to go out there. And what if they didn't go to that site that the archaeologists knew? And sometimes we feel like there's a gotcha here. We're smarter than anyone else. And we know of this site here. Can you find that? And so it's like a needle in a haystack. With the Cold Draw project, our disturbance is less than 600 acres that we have proposed. Then you start throwing the buffers into there and up to 3 miles. And we were doing a class 2 survey of looking at certain geologic outcrops, areas that may have deposits. And that increased our survey to over 40,000 acres. And when you start putting boots on the ground, trying to find these resources that will not be impacted other than visual, and it's only temporarily until we get our reclamation put back into place. We were told that the definition temporary is maybe 2 to 3 months. So that's where sometimes as you're doing pipeline projects is they can get through there. They don't have as much impact as where we're going to be out there, maybe 7, 10, 15 years, depending on how long it takes to mine that. Then they're saying you're no longer temporary, but you are more of a permanent.
So the extortion goes on. And is this Cold Draw project, is that in Tin Sleep, did you say?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, no, it's in 8 miles north of Thermopolis. We have projects throughout the Bighorn Basin that go from, well, actually Warren, Montana down to Thermopolis. So our greatest archaeology issues have stemmed from the Worland Field Office, BLM, and that seems to be the main focus where some of these other field offices, we recognize, we look at it, we mitigate, move on with the projects. But no, the Cold Draw project, the Matitsi Draw was another controversial one that was approved probably 7 years ago, which is adjacent right to Cold Draw. And so it's our continuation. We've mined through Matitsi Draw. We have 100% mined out on the Rusty Bed. We were at the dire need of this product, and that's part why we conformed. We get where we need that resource.
Thank you.
Any further questions, please? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Sylvester, for all that you do to support our economy and the economy of our neighbors to our north, and wish you the best of luck in your advocacy as we move forward. Certainly, we're all on the same page here, I think. So, any public comment on this topic before we take a break? Mr. Detai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a correction. I misspoke in my testimony. The severance tax for surface coal in Wyoming is at 7%, not 8%. And underground is 3.5%. So I just wanted to make that correction. We do. I raised it and then I
All right, we'll go ahead and get going again. We got one more agenda item before lunch, and that is our bill draft we've had crafted.
Can you give me yours?
And so we'll go ahead and get started on that. Also, we'll go ahead and go over the bill draft, what it does, and get into the details here. This is a kind of a continuation of a personal bill, frankly, of mine that didn't get too far in the process, probably needed a little bit more work. It was kind of a new idea just before the session started last winter, but now we've had an opportunity to refine it. And thank Mr. Brody for the thoughtful work that really has improved the legislation. So the idea, once again, is that if we have an increase in royalty rates for coal, oil, natural gas from our federal partners, and Wyoming would be the direct beneficiary of that royalty rate increase to our 48%, that maybe that's, that would be inconsistent for the state to complain about what the feds are doing to make us less competitive, but then turn around and put our hand out and receive the financial benefits. So that's the concept behind the bill, to reduce the tax burden in a way that's proportional to the increase in revenue that we would see from any increase in the royalty rate, in particular on those core industries. So that's the concept behind the bill. Mr. Co-Chairman, you have some.
Mr. Chairman, so this is a kind of a continuation of what you had started working on during the general session, am I correct? Because we had talked about this then.
Yes, this
The
is
two of us had talked about it. Yes. Okay.
Yes, yeah, there's a personal bill that went through Minerals Committee just fine. Had some trouble on the Senate floor. I think there's a lot of confusion about what it did and uncertainty. But this cleans up a lot of those concerns.
Okay.
And there's also the question of how you balance that out. The original bill dealt with severance taxes and a reduction in the severance tax, which is controversial. This is much more streamlined. It doesn't affect our end of it that we have to decide, because severance taxes have a different, they fund different things than our FMRs do. And this eliminates that controversy by simply focusing on the federal mineral royalties and maintaining consistency there.
Okay.
So a significantly different approach from the state side, same objective. But Mr. Brody, I think, has solved a lot of those controversies, which it turns out are completely unnecessary. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Brody, Legislative Service Office. I'll just kind of go through the bill more generally, can get into the specifics if there's questions, but as the chairman stated, big picture, that's what this bill does, is it does a proportional decrease through a tax exemption to the severance taxes imposed on coal, oil, and gas. So I guess going to the second page of the bill, beginning with 94601, this is the article that deals with government royalty revenue and how that revenue is going to be distributed from the federal government and through the state. Speaking more generally, this statute has a very, I'll call it detailed distribution formula for how current FMR royalty revenue is distributed in the state. This bill does not disturb that distribution formula. What it does is it freezes that formula in time. So all the funds that are coming into the state at the current 12.5 FMR rate when it comes to mineral royalties, those are going to be distributed as they normally would, and no ground is disturbed. The way this bill acts or works is that anything cumulatively above that 12.5%, and that I should note that percentage changes when it comes to different types of minerals, but that the same idea applies to that as well. So what happens once the FMR rate increases from that 12.5% as of January 30th of this year, which it hasn't, but that's the kind of line in the sand that we drew. Beginning at that time, any additional revenue that the state receives through its 48% share is going to be distributed into the severance distribution account. And the idea for that is to simply, in the interest of fairness, to keep the distribution from the severance tax account on the same kind of playing field that it would be without that tax exemption having been put into place. So we're just basically funneling the increased revenue that we're getting from the FMR, and we're funneling it into the tax revenue or the severance tax revenue account as if the tax exemptions weren't in place, if that makes sense. So here, the new subsection.
Co-chairman, real quick,
John, so I'm just looking at that first new paragraph and the last item created by 3914-801A. If I'm not mistaken, that already exists, correct? That section of statute, that paragraph, 3914-801A already exists.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, so that's just a reference citation to the severance tax distribution formula in the account itself.
And follow up on that, that severance tax distribution account is currently funded by FMRs. I mean, that account's associated with federal mineral royalties. Is that correct?
No. So the severance tax distribution account is the account associated with the state severance taxes that are put upon coal, oil, and gas. And because this bill would put in an exemption, the revenue going into that account would decrease as a result. So what this new subsection N does is address that issue. And it takes the revenue that would be, the state would receive from FMRs above the 12.5% and diverts that portion to the severance tax account so that everybody remains on the same kind of playing field. So as I mentioned, this new subsection N basically just tries to achieve, or it achieves that task. And then in paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 onto page 3, we're simply just identifying the minerals at issue that will fall under this new sort of distribution / tax exemption for proportional relief. Moving on to page 3, 3914-109. This is under our tax code, and 109 deals with all the coal provisions, or 100 deals with all the coal provisions. This is surface and underground coal, so this bill attaches to both. As Mr. Detai noted, we have a 7% severance tax on coal right now, and a 3.75% tax on underground coal. 1.5% of that from the Constitution has to remain in place. So that's why if you look on line 15, the tax exemption that we're creating in this new paragraph 4 is only applicable to the other components of the whole severance tax. So we have, as you all recall, we have our severance tax set at 7%, and then through multiple paragraphs, we have 1.5%, 1%, 2.5%, just like that. And the same thing happens with oil and gas. So we're just making sure that we're not creating confusion that somehow you could claim an exemption against a constitutionally mandated severance tax. So that's just why that's in there. Again, it's going to be attributable to any FMR increase after June 30th of 2021. Just with the phrasing of this paragraph, we actually discuss it being in place as of July 1st. But just so you know, those are the same dates. It's just the phrasing, and there shouldn't be any conflict, and it may raise confusion. So perhaps it's worth bringing up. Just worth noting is, since, and this is just kind of how the scheme works, but so it's on the producer to claim the exemption, and the producer would have to provide information showing the increased burden on their company as a result of the 12.5% increase, or whatever the applicable FMR is. They would then submit that information to the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue would take that increased burden, multiply it by the increased FMR, or take into account the increased FMR, and then multiply that by to take into account the state share of that. So they're not getting credit for the entire increased burden on themselves, but they are getting credit for what the state of Wyoming would receive as a result of that increase in the FMR. That is this sort of tax exemption approach is the same with the coal provisions in the bill, and the same with the oil and gas provisions in the bill. So it's largely just mirror language. And Mr. Chairman, that is largely the bill. The department's going to, by rule, establish the procedures for doing this, getting this taken care of. And then we do have a split effective date to allow for the department to engage in that rulemaking effort, so that the bill is ready to move forward by July 1st. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd answer any questions.
Any questions for me? Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, so the producer just gets credit for the portion that Wyoming would get of the FMR. What if the feds wrote that we didn't get a portion of the FMR, of the increased FMR? Say they raise it 2% and say Wyoming doesn't get a portion of that, where the feds are going to take it all. Then the producers in all these cases would not get a credit, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, yes. And I guess I can't, the bill can't predict what the federal government may do when it comes to the revenue sharing scheme when it comes to FMR. You know, off the top of my head, I'm not sure how we could craft language that would somehow be able to take that into account. We could certainly set it in stone, and, you know, the state of Wyoming just kind of bites any loss when it comes to whether you choose the producer for an increased credit or the state of Wyoming. But yeah, you're right.
And that's I think a feature about the flaw of the bill, in that it allows for that flexibility, because, and we don't have to come back and change anything, you know. And the whole selling point of the bill is that we're not going to lose money as a state, but we're not going to gain any either. So, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, and John, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm on page 2, line 12. That wording there actually takes care of that issue, because it says as a result of any cumulative increase. So it would be money we get as a result of that increase. If we don't get any money, then there's nothing to deposit. I think that, am I correct, John?
Mr. Chairman, you know, in reading that language, I can't say for sure. You know, it speaks about the cumulative increase in the FMR rate, not in any adjustments that may be made to the share that the state receives as a result of that rate. That's something to contemplate, but I'm not quite sure.
Mr. Chairman. So, John, I'm trying to read that whole paragraph, and it starts off on line 8. It says with monies received from, and then if you drop down, ignore everything in the commas, as a result of any cumulative increase. So if we receive no monies from a cumulative increase, then there's nothing happens. It stays status quo. I mean, other than the feds want more than their share. There's a way I read it, unless we're getting into the realm of the judiciary branch making a decision on what we do.
You know, Mr. Chairman, this is a component of the bill that I hadn't hadn't thought about prior to today's meeting. So I guess in rereading the provision and taking into account your comments, I think you're actually right. I think it makes sense that if any money is received, if no money is received and the state of Wyoming is kind of left out, then there is nothing to do.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I got a quick
Go ahead.
question. It's regarding, Mr. Chairman, the opt-in provision on page 4. It looks like where the burden shall be on the taxpayer to basically claim this. What was the discussion regarding that, instead of just going the other route, which would be everybody's basically an opt-out, I suppose, you know, putting the burden on the taxpayer rather than, I guess, the Department of Revenue, right? Is that the give and take on that decision to put the burden on the taxpayer?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, that was certainly part of the calculus. You know, in trying to craft a bill that's easy to understand and hopefully administratively easy to put forward, it seemed that the producer would have the necessary information readily available, as opposed to creating this administrative back and forth where the Department of Revenue is requesting numbers and perhaps those numbers aren't understood or are not what the Department of Revenue is looking for. So in a sense to sort of hopefully streamline the process. You know, it'll depend on the regulations that are promulgated by the Department of Revenue, but certainly tax exemptions are not a new thing for the department. So they can, I think they're up for that task. But yeah, that was part of it.
And now that I know I reviewed this before we got here, but now that we're here, I just, was there any thought or did you consider just having that tax credit be against that increased the FMRs? Is that possible or does it have to be associated with the severance tax that they're already paying? Or I guess the question is, do FMRs even go through the Department of Revenue at all?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure there's more than one way to skin this cat. When I was trying to come up with an easy way to understand how to administrate this sort of policy, this is just kind of what I was able to come up with using your prior legislation as sort of the template. The tax credit just, in my mind, administratively for the department and for producers, and I can be corrected certainly by the producers, but just seemed like the most straight path to try and affect a benefit when it comes to reducing the burden on mineral production. But I mean, there's certainly probably other approaches.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Brody. Don't go too far. I know you won't. So do we have any public comment? I know the Petroleum Association said they stay around and we have Mr. Detai here still. Mr. Overmuller, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Pete Overmuller, the Petroleum Association again. Appreciate the discussion on this bill. Just a couple of points based on that discussion. First of all, if I understood your question to Mr. Brody correctly regarding could you just credit the FMRs as opposed to severance, it reminds me of, I think the short answer is no, because it's not the state that has control over that. And it reminds me of my time working for then Representative Lummis when when the federal government, under the guise of saying that it cost them a lot of money to operate the federal mineral royalty program, and so that's when they took 2% of the states in order to pay for the administrative costs. We drafted a bill that said, okay, we'll take that at face value and we'll relieve you of that burden, and we'll just instead we'll have operators cut two checks, 50% to the feds and 50% to the state, and we'll be glad to take the administrative burden of collecting that tax. So it's if they decide to go further in that regard, which would take legislation and capture more for the federal government mineral royalties, that would be not only punitive on industry, that'd be punitive on the state. And we'd have a lot bigger problems to solve there if that were to occur, and hopefully it doesn't. Luckily, that's not even contemplated in a bill as bad as the reconciliation bill. So that aside, then on the opt-in part, appreciate that. I think depending on the increase, the potential increase of the royalty rate, I think you can be assured that that at least my members would be looking pretty carefully at that and would have no problem filing for a credit on severance to offset that.
Okay, any questions, committee? Co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermuller, just so I'm clear, your members in general would support this concept?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhardt, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right, well, we look forward, hopefully this bill moving forward, and I look forward to your continued input. So we have the Mining Association here too. Go ahead, Mr. Detai.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Travis Detai, Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association, fully support this concept. Just based on the discussion we had this morning, make no mistake about it, federal policy right now is geared towards keeping our minerals in the ground. And whether that's making them too expensive to produce or through the regulatory process, this concept and this bill, Mr. Chairman, would help, kind of keep us afloat if we do see some increases in the federal mineral royalty. So we appreciate the committee and you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this forward, and we support it fully.
Any questions from mining association? Okay, well, I actually haven't no go just yet, and it might apply to the Petroleum Association as well. We also had discussions about not just increased royalty rates, but bonus bids, rental rates, those sorts of things. I have to admit my ignorance. I don't know if those also get thrown into the FMRs that get diverted to the state, or if that's worthy of consideration to include any increases in those rates as well, and whether that even work, even if that's the same, revenue stream from the state's perspective.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a crack at that one. For the bonus bids and stuff, that's all dependent on the bid of the lease. I don't think that would apply to this. I think you're good just doing the mineral royalty.
And Mr. Overmiller, same question to you, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Detail, on that. The question of the bonus bids, I mean, to answer your question, it is lumped in with FMRs in terms of distribution to the states, in terms of the percentage of those of what's sent to the states and shared with the federal government. But I think the bill as drafted really covers what the biggest challenge is. Well, I'll just leave it at that. I think you're on the right track with the bill.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Anybody on Zoom? Are we good, Mr. Brody? Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
So public comment is closed. Committee, there's a bill before you. What's your pleasure? Hi, Senator Biden, second by Representative McGuire. And I hope that your enthusiasm continues, but we actually have to sell this to our colleagues, and you can kind of all your support. Okay, so any discussion on the bill? No amendments, no nothing. Perfect the way it is. We'll find out in February. Okay. And yeah, okay. So no further discussion. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote for this select committee sponsorship of this piece of legislation.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on whether the committee will sponsor 22 LSO 0065. Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Beitman.
Aye.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Boner.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
The motion has been adopted.
We have, we'll make that decision later, which chamber is best to attempt introduction in, and we'll just go from there. So Representative McGuire, you have something?
A quick question. So this is the only bill that we have from this committee. And do we have to, or is it recommended to work with minerals or any other committee, or just bring it directly? Thank you.
Yeah, so we have the capability of sponsoring bills as a select committee. In terms of what committee it would be assigned to once we get to our chambers. I know in the Senate, minerals is definitely my choice. I don't know what the calculation is in the House. It could, you could just, yeah.
Not
Yep.
revenue.
Right, you can definitely justify minerals or revenue, and yeah, because it definitely touches on both. So yeah, we'll have that discussion, and I'll talk to some of the colleagues on my side. We do have a recorded vote for a similar concept from last year, and I'll have to talk to some of my colleagues and see what the temperature is in our chamber, and I'm sure Co-Chairman Burkhart will do the same in his. And like I said, I hope your enthusiasm continues, and you can maybe help us out in those calculations. So, okay, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, we have a minerals meeting in January, probably the 12th through the 14th, we could bring this up just as an informational thing. You know, the minerals committee doesn't need to vote on it, but you maybe get some advocates there for you if you wanted to present it there.
I appreciate that. I think that'd be a good idea.
I think it'll be right here.
Perfect. Okay, anything else before we take a break here for lunch? Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Game and Fish. Never mind. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. We do have somebody came up from our last topic, and if it's okay with the committee, we're gonna go ahead and just knock that out right now. Should be relatively short. We're gonna go ahead and for the public's input, we're looking at our last topic originally scheduled for 3:45. Talk about hunting and fishing on refuges, and certainly, nothing's going to prevent us from coming back to this topic if we somehow have public comment. But we do have a representative from the Game and Fish Department to discuss this right now. So here we are. Welcome, sir. Please identify yourself and proceed with testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm John Kennedy, Deputy Director for Wyoming Game and Fish. And first, I appreciate you allowing me to talk now. This really frees up the day for me. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I do think this can be fairly brief, and I'm not exactly clear on what the committee's discussed in the past with respect to national wildlife refuges. Of course, they're managed primarily by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Interior. They're responsible for the acquisition and overall management theme and strategy for refuges, but the states do have a role, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute. So I think that I can give you a pretty good update. We've worked with the state fish and wildlife agencies, have worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, both at the national level and both here and here in Wyoming, obviously on hunting and fishing and fish and wildlife management on refuges. So I'll give an update, and then the committee can ask any questions or let me know what it is you're most interested in, and I'll try to answer those questions at that time. So public access for hunting and fishing opportunities, as this committee knows, continues to be one of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department's highest priorities, and refuges are no different. Although we don't have a lot of refuge lands in Wyoming, they do represent very important places for fish and wildlife management and hunting and fishing opportunities. First, for background, I'm just to make sure the committee is aware, there's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service policy that a lot of folks aren't familiar with. And I just wanted to let the committee know about that. The state fish and wildlife agencies back in 2007 and 2008 worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the national level to develop a policy that would describe the state fish and wildlife agency's role on refuges. We did that because prior to that time, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service often considered the state fish and wildlife agency as another member of the public or a conservation organization. And we felt as though we had specific jurisdictional responsibilities on refuges. And certainly if you go back and look at certain sections of Code of Federal Regulations and Fish and Wildlife Service policy and regulations, you'll see that that's true. The state fish and wildlife agencies do actually have a jurisdictional role on refuges. A lot of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employees at this point don't understand that policy exists. And so we're working with them in Wyoming to have a better relationship with them and get involved early on in the process and not just later as just another comment on refuges. So if you look at those Code of Federal Regulations and National Wildlife Refuge System policies, it will describe that role very clearly in there that the states have. So since the development of that policy and with certain secretarial orders that have been issued and refuge policies, the Fish and Wildlife Service has worked closely with us in expanding hunting and fishing opportunities on refuges throughout the country. Last year, then Interior Secretary Bernhardt announced the opening or expansion of 859 hunting and fishing opportunities on 147 national wildlife refuges throughout the country. That involves about 2.3 million acres of land. So it's significant to say the least. And during the last 2 years, the Wyoming Game and Fish Departments worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service to open or expand hunting and fishing opportunities across 22,000 acres of refuge lands here in Wyoming. The most recent actions that have taken place in Wyoming involve the Bamforth National Wildlife Refuge, where we opened up game and big game hunting, upland game and big game hunting for the first time ever. So that's significant. That's in the southern part of the Laramie Plains. It's about 1,166 acres. I won't go into details on these unless you have specific questions on a specific refuge in the state, but we also expanded hunting and fishing opportunities on Cokeville Meadows National Wildlife Refuge in Bear River Valley of southwestern Wyoming. That's on 6,466 acres. On the Hutton Lake National Wildlife Refuge in the southern part of the Laramie Plains, and that's almost 2,000, just under 2,000 acres of land. And on the Pathfinder National Wildlife Refuge located in central Wyoming, it's about 50 miles west of Casper, and that involves just under 17,000 acres, where we have not only worked with the service to manage fish and wildlife populations, but actually create hunting and fishing opportunities that haven't been there before in the past. So that's significant. Not to end this in a negative light, but just last week, environmentalists sued the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over this work, expansion of hunting and fishing opportunities on national wildlife refuges, and that was issued just last week. The concern that's cited in the lawsuit points to potential harms to vulnerable species. The lawsuit emphasizes the threat posed by the use of lead ammunition or lead tackle. This was a serious issue that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service evaluated when they worked with the states on these opportunities, new expansion opportunities on refuges. They looked at it quite closely, and the state fish and wildlife agencies agreed with their assessment that the number of new hunters and anglers expected to use lead bullets is extremely low, if any at all, on refuges, or lead tackle. And the lead tackle is anticipated to be quite low as well. So the resulting addition of lead into the environment should be negligible or minor. And that was the decision that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made. And that's something the state fish and wildlife agencies have been on board with. However, the lawsuit has been filed, so we will have to see what effect that has to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their work on refuges. But
Senator Byman.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm reading right here that non-toxic ammunition is already required on national wildlife refuges for wild waterfowl and upland bird hunting. And that lead rifle bullets are disallowed on national wildlife refuges too. So is that true? I guess you can't trust everything you read on the internet, but that's what I'm reading.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that is true. That is true. And I don't want to speak for every refuge in the country, but I'm pretty certain that that's accurate. So not to end this in a negative light with respect to that lawsuit, but I think that's something that this committee should at least be aware of. I'd be happy to keep the committee updated, or you can keep up to date on that lawsuit, I'm sure, online. State fish and wildlife agencies are going to continue to move forward and work with the service on expanding hunting and fishing on refuges for sure. So some really good work has taken place on refuges throughout the country and here in Wyoming. And with that, Mr. Chairman, again, I'm not sure on the past discussions this committee has had on national wildlife refuges in the country or the state, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and something that I would ask you to monitor and maybe work with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. So if you look at an aviation map, anytime there's a national wildlife refuge, there's a note. It shows the boundary, and then there's a note, and it said aircraft are requested to stay 2,000 feet AGL above ground level. And it really has never been a problem. However, there's a small airport. It's right next to the Copalis National Wildlife Refuge out in Washington State. And so pilots have routinely flown through that airspace, the National Wild Refuge, to land at the airport. And then all of a sudden they started getting violations from the FAA. And I'll just put it that a violation from the FAA, the presumption is that you're guilty and you have to prove yourself innocent. It's very difficult to work with. And so I would just ask you to, since that seems to be a trend, and now apparently in California, they're starting to do the same thing with some of the ones around San Francisco. If you would just watch that, because for example, you mentioned the refuge near Pathfinder. Well, if you're flying to Rollins, you go right over the top of that. And up here at our altitude, sometimes it's difficult to get more than 2,000 feet AGL. So if you would just watch that, and if it starts to rear its ugly head here in Wyoming, let us know and let YDOT know so that we can work to mitigate or protect what we're doing here in Wyoming, because if we can't fly over those areas, it would severely affect general aviation in the state of Wyoming. Also, the game and fish flying to look for wildlife and things like that. All those things. And again, you get a violation, it's an uphill battle to try and fight that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative, we'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any push to crack down on hunting, say on the National Elk Refuge in Jackson? Are we still going to be able to hunt out there? Or what's the status on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, there is no change being proposed on the National Elk Refuge at this time. So bison and elk hunting, limited bison and elk hunting opportunities are provided, and certainly fishing on Flat Creek is quite popular. There are no changes that are in the hopper at this time. Are you suggesting additional hunting opportunities or just the stat?
Mr. Chairman, my wife actually shot a buffalo out there. And so if it wasn't for that opportunity,
That's right.
We wouldn't have been able to fill that tag. So it's important for us as a state to manage our wildlife and use that refuge to thin the herd when possible. So I'm all for it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, so for members of the public, the easiest way for them to stay informed on this is look at the department's website. I mean, I get questions all the time, can I hunt on this refuge or not? Can I do? Would you say the easiest way is just tell them, go to your website and look?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and Representative Burkhardt, I think when you say website, you mean Game and Fish, well, actually, the best way to stay informed is through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. In fact, just a couple of days ago, I went on their website, and if you type in a refuge, it will give you a pretty nice colored summary with maps, and it explains all the hunting and fishing opportunities that are allowed on that refuge. I have all those, and I'd be happy to share them with this committee if you'd like. But I think members of the public should stay informed either through their local game and fish office, because we are working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or visit the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. We'd be happy, though, to help out in any way we can.
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't want them. I can go and look for myself. No sense you doing what I can do. Thank you for the offer, though.
I have it done and have them in a folder. So if you need them, just give me a call.
Any further questions? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At another committee meeting, and I can't remember if it was the Ag or the TRW committee, they were talking about the Pathfinder area, and that it was my understanding that the Game and Fish was reluctant to accept management of that area. And I can't remember the details on it, but when you brought this out about the Game and Fish taking over the management of these areas that come to mind. And so could you comment on that? Do you know anything about that? But I was certain that it had to do with Pathfinder and some management action that the Game and Fish was asked to do, but they were reluctant to accept that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, I'm not aware of a specific issue of Game and Fish asking for management responsibility on any refuge, first of all, and certainly not on Pathfinder. We're comfortable with the shared jurisdiction that we have on national wildlife refuges, and we're comfortable with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service maintaining primary management responsibility for the refuges, and that includes Pathfinder. I know that we just worked with the service just in the last year to open up dove hunting, for example, on Pathfinder, and Pathfinder has some other hunting opportunities that already exist there. So I'm not specific to that issue. I can look into that. Now, we're involved in a lot of management issues surrounding Pathfinder refuge as well. And so maybe the issue came up there, but I would need to look into that for you. And I certainly can do that and get back to you.
It could have been relative to fishing, but I just can't remember.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I'll look into that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, just maybe a little bit of digression here. You heard us talk earlier about sage grouse and that can you give us like a 1-minute status of sage grouse and the mitigation efforts we've done and the effect and all of that? And if you can't right now, that's understandable. You weren't prepared for that discussion, I know.
Mr. Chairman.
If you want, go ahead.
Members of the committee, no, I was hoping not to talk about sage grouse, grizzly bears, or wolves today with you because I just wanted to focus on refuges. No, I mean, the short answer to that is, Representative Burkhart, a lot of management continues and a lot of research and monitoring of sage grouse continues in the state. And we're very proud of that. We have excellent working committees with the sage grouse implementation team still. We got local working groups throughout the state working on sage grouse. Having said that, sage grouse populations, as I think this committee knows, they're cyclic. I mean, they go up and down like most wildlife populations. And certainly this last season, through our LEC counts, we did see a decline in numbers on LECs in certain areas, but it's not something that Game and Fish is alarmed about right now. We've seen this before. I know that out in my travels in the desert this year, I saw a heck of a lot of sage grouse and a lot of really good habitat. But the sage grouse numbers and LEC counts are tied to habitat conditions, and there has been some really, really dry drought conditions going on. So that a little bit of a decline was not something that shocked us. But we're going to continue to monitor. We have to monitor sage grouse numbers in the state very closely, as you know. And at this point, we're comfortable with the management strategy that we have in place for sage grouse.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right. Well, thank you for being here. Glad we get you out of here before lunch.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. And I've got these action items, and I'll follow through with both of these action items through the committee chairs.
Actually, I just go ahead and email the whole.
Go straight to them?
Yeah, or also attorney can help out too.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for being flexible with the schedule.
Of course. Okay, so just want to double check before we break for lunch, any additional public comment at this time? I know we're kind of changed up the agenda. Anything else from this morning? Any public comment, either online or in person? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a break for lunch. Come back at 1 o'clock. We'll get started. Mr. Co-Chairman, you have something?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we probably do need to be back at 1 because I know a number of the members of our federal delegation staff are planning to be in attendance by virtual means, and I know their time is valuable. We don't want to delay them.
Yeah. Excellent point. We do have a whole hour and 10 minutes, so 1 o'clock sharp. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I won't be back at 1 o'clock sharp. I've got a medical procedure, but wanted to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas and good luck. Yeah. Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and take a break.